It started innocently, as these things always do. Lucy had always been imaginative, sketching wild landscapes, crafting stories about knights and dragons. So when she mentioned her new friend, Eli, Alex and Clara didn't think much of it. Children invented friends all the time, after all. But then Lucy began to insist. Eli was real. It was a quiet autumn evening when she first mentioned him. Alex had just settled into the worn recliner in their cozy living room, the faint hum of the TV filling the space. Lucy sat cross-legged on the rug, her red hair falling over her face as she carefully arranged her toy tea set. "Would Eli like some tea?" she asked, her voice light and cheerful. Alex looked up from his book. "Who's Eli, sweetheart?" Lucy didn't look at him. "He's sitting right there." She pointed to the empty space beside her, a spot Alex had just walked through moments ago. Alex smiled and leaned back. "Well, tell him dinner's soon." At first, Eli was just a name, a quirk of Lucy's playtime. But as the days passed, Alex and Clara began to notice small oddities. Lucy started setting a place for Eli at the dinner table. When Alex asked what Eli liked to eat, Lucy would shrug and say, "He doesn't eat. He just watches." One evening, as Alex tucked her in, Lucy asked, "Can Eli sleep in the bed with me?" Alex chuckled. "I think your bed's too small for two people." Lucy tilted her head, her small face serious in the dim light. "But he's not a person." A chill tickled Alex's spine, but he laughed it off. "Sweet dreams, Lou." He kissed her forehead and shut the door behind him. Later that night, as he told Clara about the conversation, she waved it off. "Kids are weird. She'll grow out of it." But Lucy didn't grow out of it. In fact, Eli became more present. "Eli says he used to live here," Lucy declared one afternoon. She was sitting by the bay window, crayons scattered around her. She held up a drawing of a dark, hunched figure standing beside a child. Her, Alex realized. The figure loomed in shadows, while Lucy was drawn in vivid colors. Alex frowned. "Where'd you get that idea?" "He told me," she replied matter-of-factly. Her tone carried a weight Alex couldn't quite place, an assurance beyond her years. Later, Alex shared the drawing with Clara, but she only rolled her eyes. "It's just a phase," she insisted. "She'll grow bored of it soon enough." Alex wasn't so sure. It was a week after Lucy's declaration about Eli living here that Alex's curiosity tipped into concern. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind of day meant for staying in and sorting through old family videos. While Clara was at the store, Alex decided to compile clips for an upcoming family slideshow. He smiled as he watched footage of Lucy's recent birthday. In one video, she was laughing in the backyard, spinning wildly in her new princess dress. "You're dizzy, Lou," he heard himself say in the clip. But Lucy didn't respond to him. Instead, she turned toward the tree line, her laughter trailing off. The camera jittered as Alex had adjusted the angle, and for a brief moment, the faint sound of a whisper came through the speakers. Alex frowned, rewinding the clip and turning up the volume. It was faint, but unmistakable. A voice, low, gravelly, responded to Lucy's laugh. "Keep spinning." Alex froze. He rewound it again, this time holding his breath. "Keep spinning." The whisper was there, clearer now, its cadence almost playful. The sound unsettled him. He glanced around the room, as if expecting to see someone there. But of course it was just him, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Alex rationalized it as interference, a car passing by, or maybe a neighbor's muffled voice caught in the background. Yet he couldn't shake the unease. He decided to set up cameras in Lucy's room. It felt ridiculous, like he was feeding into an overactive imagination, but something about the whisper gnawed at him. That night, after tucking Lucy in, He positioned a small baby monitor on the shelf across from her bed. It was the kind with both video and audio, the kind parents use to keep tabs on infants. He didn't tell Clara. She'd only laugh at him. The next morning, Alex retrieved the footage. The video was uneventful for the first few hours. Lucy tossing in her sleep, the shadows of tree branches shifting on the walls. But then, around 2 a.m., something peculiar happened. Lucy stirred, sitting upright in bed. "Eli," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "I'm tired. Go away." There was silence for several seconds. Then faintly from somewhere off camera, "I'm here to stay." The voice was deep and raspy, not unlike the whisper from the birthday video. It carried an unnerving quality, like the scrape of metal on stone. Alex's heart raced as he stared at the screen. The audio crackled slightly, as though the voice had strained the device's capabilities. He rewound it 3 times, each time hoping the sound wouldn't be there. But it was. Every time, his first instinct was to wake Clara, but something stopped him. He needed more evidence, needed to be sure he wasn't losing his grip on reality. So instead, he decided to keep the cameras rolling, even as unease rooted itself deeper in his chest. That night, as Lucy played with her tea set, Alex found himself watching the empty chair beside her. It wasn't just empty space anymore. It was Eli's seat. The first few nights after setting up the cameras had been uneventful. Lucy's sleep was peaceful, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old floorboards. Alex began to feel ridiculous. Maybe it was all in his head. Maybe Eli really was just a figment of Lucy's imagination. Then the recordings changed. On the 4th night, Alex noticed something odd. As he reviewed the footage, the faint outline of a shadow moved across Lucy's room. It wasn't from the trees outside. Alex had memorized the way those branches swayed. This was something else, something unnatural. It glided from one corner of the room to the other, pausing by Lucy's bed. The shadow didn't follow the usual rules of light and movement. It stretched and contorted, forming impossible shapes before vanishing altogether. Alex leaned closer to the screen, his breath shallow. He replayed the footage, heart pounding as he noted the exact moment Lucy stirred in her sleep, as if sensing the presence near her. And then there was the whisper. The same voice he'd heard before, gravelly, too deep to be Lucy's, muttered something low and unintelligible. Alex cranked up the volume. The words came through faintly, like a distant hum. "Stay still," it said. Alex's hands trembled as he paused the video. He felt like a trespasser, like he'd stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. His mind raced with explanations. A faulty camera, interference from a nearby device, or even an overactive imagination. But deep down, he knew none of these could account for what he'd just witnessed. He showed the footage to Clara the next morning. Her initial reaction was skeptical, her expression shifting between disbelief and irritation. "Alex, it's just shadows," she insisted. "The camera quality isn't great, and you're reading too much into it." "But the voice," Alex pressed. "You heard it, right?" Clara hesitated, her brow furrowing. "It's probably interference, or Lucy talking in her sleep." Alex sighed, realizing he wasn't going to convince her. But her dismissal didn't ease his growing unease. He resolved to keep the cameras running. The following night, things escalated. Around midnight, Alex awoke to the sound of faint laughter. It wasn't Lucy's usual giggle, light and carefree. This was deeper, uneven, like an imitation of a child's laugh. He bolted upright, his heart racing, and hurried to Lucy's room. She was sitting up in bed, facing the dark corner near her dresser. Her face was pale, her wide eyes locked on something Alex couldn't see. "Lucy," he whispered, keeping his voice steady. "What's wrong?" She didn't look at him. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the corner. Eli doesn't like you watching him. A cold wave of dread swept over Alex. He flipped the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. The corner was empty, nothing but shadows from the furniture. Lucy blinked, as if waking from a trance, and looked at her father with confusion. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice groggy. "Did I do something wrong?" Alex forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetie, go back to sleep." But as he left the room, the feeling of being watched clung to him like a second skin. The next morning, Alex contacted Henry, an old family friend who worked as a folklorist. Henry specialized in urban legends and folklore, a career that had always fascinated Alex, though he'd never had reason to take it seriously. Until now. When Henry arrived, he brought a thick, leather-bound book and a skeptical but curious attitude. "So," Henry said, settling into the couch, "tell me about Eli." Alex recounted everything, the whispers, the moving shadows, the strange recordings. Henry listened intently, his sharp eyes narrowing as Alex described the events in detail. When Alex finished, Henry sat back, rubbing his chin. "This doesn't sound like a typical haunting," he said finally. "It's more personal. The name Eli doesn't ring any folkloric bells, but what you're describing aligns with stories of parasitic spirits." "Parasitic spirits," Clara echoed, crossing her arms. She'd reluctantly agreed to let Henry visit, though her skepticism was clear. "Sounds made up." Henry ignored her. "These entities attach themselves to people, often children, using their imaginations as a doorway. Children are more open, more vulnerable. They don't question things the way adults do." Alex felt a chill creep up his spine. But why Lucy? Why now? Henry shrugged. "It's hard to say. Sometimes these things are tied to a location, a house, an object. Has Lucy mentioned anything specific about Eli, like where he comes from?" Alex hesitated, then recounted Lucy's comment about Eli having lived in the house before. Henry nodded slowly, flipping through his book. "That might be your link. If this thing was tied to the house, Lucy could have unknowingly invited it in." "So how do we get rid of it?" Alex asked, his voice taut with urgency. Henry sighed. "It's not that simple. You can't just banish something like this. It thrives on attention, on belief. The more you acknowledge it, the stronger it becomes." Clara groaned. "So you're saying we're supposed to just ignore it?" "Not exactly," Henry said. "You have to reassert control. Show Lucy that Eli isn't real. Spirits like this thrive on ambiguity. Remove its power by removing its presence in her mind." That night, Alex tried to put Henry's advice into action. He gently explained to Lucy that Eli wasn't real, that he was just part of her imagination. Lucy looked up at him with wide, solemn eyes. "But he is real," she insisted. "He told me you'd say that. He said you're scared of him." The room felt colder, and Alex forced himself to smile. "Well, maybe Eli's wrong," he said lightly. "Let's see how brave you are without him." Lucy didn't respond. Instead, she stared past Alex, her gaze fixed on something behind him. When Alex turned, there was nothing there. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Alex didn't sleep that night. He sat at the dining table, hunched over the laptop, reviewing the latest footage from Lucy's room. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of settling wood. Clara had taken Lucy to her parents' house for the night, leaving Alex alone to confront whatever had taken root in their home. The footage played, grainy and faintly distorted, showing Lucy fast asleep. Hours passed in near silence until the camera began to glitch, subtle flickers of static crawling across the screen. At first, Alex thought it was a malfunction. Then the shadow returned. It wasn't like before, faint and fleeting. This time it moved with deliberate purpose, stretching taller as it crossed the room. Alex's pulse quickened. The shadow stopped at Lucy's bedside and lingered. Its edges writhed, tendrils reaching toward her like ink dissolving in water. "Lucy," a voice whispered faintly through the speakers. The same low, gravelly tone that had haunted him for weeks. It was clearer now, more deliberate. "Why did you leave?" Alex's breath hitched as the shadow turned toward the camera. For the first time, he could make out a shape, vague and shifting, like smoke barely clinging to a humanoid form. Two hollow pits where eyes should have been stared directly at the lens. The screen went black. The room felt oppressive, the air thick and stifling. Alex's instincts screamed at him to shut the laptop, to leave the house and never return. But he forced himself to stay. He rewound the footage, pausing at the moment the shadow faced the camera. "I see you," Alex muttered under his breath. Suddenly, the laptop screen flickered. The image reappeared, but something was different. The shadow was gone, replaced by a figure sitting on the edge of Lucy's bed. It was indistinct, barely more than a silhouette, but its presence radiated unease. Alex leaned closer. The figure tilted its head, as though listening. Then, in a voice clear and cold, it spoke directly to the camera. "Why do you watch?" Alex recoiled, his heart pounding. The screen cut to static again, but the audio continued, soft, broken whispers crawling out of the speakers. He strained to make sense of the words, catching fragments. "Stay. Ours. Hers." His hands trembled as he slammed the laptop shut. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that pressed into his ears and made his own breathing seem unnaturally loud. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the dark windows. The reflection staring back at him looked pale, haggard. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself. But his voice sounded weak, as though the house had stolen its strength. Gathering his resolve, Alex grabbed the camera from Lucy's room. If Eli was tied to the house, perhaps confronting it head-on would break its hold. He set the camera on a tripod in the center of the living room, aimed at the sofa, and hit record. The red light blinked steadily, the only movement in the dim room. "I know you're here," Alex said, his voice steady despite the cold knot in his stomach. "You've been following Lucy, but she's gone now. It's just me." The room remained still, but the air felt heavier. Alex's breath fogged as the temperature dropped. The shadows along the walls seemed darker, shifting faintly at the edges of his vision. "You don't belong here," he continued, louder this time. "Leave my family alone." A faint sound answered, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Alex's hands tightened into fists as the hum grew louder, resolving into whispers. The words were incomprehensible, overlapping in a chorus of hollow voices. The camera began to glitch, the red light flickering erratically. On the display, Alex saw movement, a ripple in the shadows. The figure appeared again, sitting on the sofa. Its form was clearer now, its edges defined but fluid, like smoke held in place by an invisible container. "You brought me here," it said, its voice reverberating with unnatural depth. "You made her see." The words struck Alex like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind racing. Lucy had seen Eli first, but was it because of him? Had his growing obsession, his constant watching, created a bridge for whatever this was? The figure leaned forward, its eyeless gaze fixed on him. "You can't take her away. She's mine now." "No," Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "She's not." Summoning every ounce of courage, Alex lunged for the camera, ripping it off the tripod and pointing it directly at the figure. The screen buzzed with static, but he kept the lens trained on the entity. "I don't believe in you," he said, his voice rising with defiance. "You're nothing but shadows. You're nothing." The whispers faltered, the figure's form flickering. The shadows along the walls receded slightly, the oppressive air lifting just enough for Alex to breathe. He didn't stop. "You're nothing," he shouted, stepping forward. The figure writhed, its shape unraveling like smoke caught in a breeze. The static grew louder, drowning out the whispers until the screen went dark. And then, silence. Alex collapsed onto the floor, the camera slipping from his hands. The room was still, the air lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time, Alex felt truly alone, but in the best way. When Clara and Lucy returned the next day, Alex didn't tell them everything. He didn't need to. Lucy didn't mention Eli again, and the house felt like their own once more. But sometimes late at night, Alex thought he heard whispers through the walls.